Okay, welcome to Village Church Sabbath School Live. We are a week ahead and we are discussing this week debt. Lesson 5, dealing with debt. So, the first thing we're going to look at is the memory text. The rich rules over the poor and the borrower is servant to the lender. We don't need to spend too much time on this because this text will come up again in our lesson. But a key word, remember I tell you to look for the key words when looking at Bible verses? What do you think the key word is here? Well, yeah, that was the key word for me, servant. You don't want to be a servant to...
Debt or money.
Yeah, there you go, to debt or money. You want to be a servant of God, right? Or a servant to God. Okay. Sabbath afternoon. They had a very good definition for debt. And in case you forgot what that definition is, if you read the lesson, or maybe you're peeking right now, the question is, what is debt? What do you think debt is? What would you say debt is? And I do have a mic here for comments.
And I'm going to say money you have borrowed and you promise to pay back.
Okay.
So it's an agreement of money you spent that you promise to pay off.
So, okay, so added to that, so it's like a promise. You're taking money with the promise that you're going to pay it back, and then, like you said, it's not yours. Any other comments before I unveil what the quarterly says? Okay, here's what the quarterly says. Debt is living today on what you expect to earn in the future. Does that hit home for you? Okay. Living today on what you expect to earn in the future. Now, is that a safe thing to do?
No.
Bill says absolutely not. But we end up doing it a lot, don't we? Now, there's something else here.
I think it really comes on how you were grown up. I was taught with both my parents and grandparents that if you don't have the money, you're not getting it. So you just deny yourself because you can't afford it.
Yeah, but we live in a generation that has an issue with that, right? And I'm including myself. I'm including myself, of course. Everything is so convenient today with credit cards. You can have it right now. You don't have to wait for it. Why wait when you can have it now? Just pay it off later, right? But what does it say in Romans 13:8? Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. Now, I will tell you, because human nature is what it is, I've read this verse many times thinking, well, I don't owe any individual any money. I just own maybe a credit card company of money. So this verse really doesn't speak to that, because this is talking about individuals, and you can't really love a company like you love an individual, right? I mean, so how does this verse apply to credit card debt? But you see how the deceitful and desperately wicked heart can justify things, right? Okay, so be aware of that. Now, Sunday gives us 3 causes of debt. There are actually more. There was another one I found in Proverbs. But we're going to look at these, and I added some verses from Proverbs because, remember last week we talked about how Jesus referred to money, and especially in the Sermon on the Mount. In the middle chapter, chapter 6, almost the entire chapter is dealing with financial things. But if you were to list another place in Scripture that talks about money, I think most of us would agree that would be Proverbs, right? I mean, we've all read Proverbs, and there's a lot there that is said about money. So we're going to look at some of these texts today. But 3 causes of debt. The first cause is ignorance. I was actually going to have you tell me some causes, but I already gave you the first one. Okay, ignorance. And according to the lesson, these are listed in order of highest to lowest. So ignorance, according to the lesson, because it's number one, would be the greatest cause of debt. So I have a couple texts here to look up. Proverbs 17:18 and 22:3. And one person can read both, or I can have individuals read them separately.
A man void of understanding striketh hands and become surety in the presence of his friend.
Okay, so let's talk about that one for a second. So what does it mean to be surety in a pledge? What's that talking about? A man who, what does it say, strikes his hands in a pledge of surety? And what will be the consequences? What does it say the consequences are? Does it say? I don't have the text before me. Oh, okay. Someone who does that is void of understanding. Okay, so that's the whole point. So the phrase void of understanding refers to a person's ignorance, right? Now, I will tell you, I've had some stories where people tried to get me to co-sign a loan. This is what this is talking about, surety, becoming a co-signer. And at my previous place of employment, there was a guy, this is when I was a lot younger. I was still in my, I was still in my 30s, and I'm in my 50s now. Time flies. But anyway, this guy, he was dating a girl, and he had become engaged, and he wanted me to co-sign a loan so he could buy her an engagement ring. Yeah, I mean, if that doesn't have disaster written all over it, I don't know what does, especially with the way things work. And of course, I'm talking about the penitentiary. You can imagine the dating pool up there, how that works, right? And you think I was ignorant enough, foolish enough to fall for that? I didn't. I knew about this text in Proverbs at the time, even though I wasn't practicing my faith, but I still knew about this principle. And I thought, yeah, that's not going to happen. I didn't tell him. I just kind of avoided him every time I saw him, and eventually he stopped asking me. So people with bad financial history tend to prey on those with good financial history. And actually, we're going to talk about that again later when we get to it. But another text about ignorance, Proverbs 22:3. What does that text say?
A prudent man foreseeth the evil, and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Okay,
so this has a broader application to just finances, but you can apply finances to this. I mean, someone who's wise will look to the future and see what decisions to avoid and what decisions to make when it comes to money. You'll foresee the consequences, right? Okay, what do you suppose another cause of debt is, besides being ignorant about how money works? Yes. That's the next one on the list. And for me, I might put this as number one, but the lesson didn't. But anyway, that's okay. But we have a few texts here from Proverbs. 21:17. We have another volunteer. 21:17.
Yes. He who loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich.
Okay, he who loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. Does this not show? Okay, so I added this text. The other texts that follow, the other two texts on the screen, deal more specifically with the idea of greed. But I wanted to include this one because, like you mentioned, selfishness. This is a form of selfishness, pleasure. And because we're always seeking things to pleasure us, that can lead to debt, right? Okay, so now what about 22:16? You want to read another one? Proverbs 22:16.
He who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty.
Okay, so now this is dealing more directly with greed, right? Oppressing the poor to increase his riches. And if you do that, what's going to happen to you? You're going to come to poverty, right? And then what about Proverbs 28:22? One more text.
A man with an evil eye hastens after riches and does not consider that poverty will come upon him.
A man with an evil eye hastens after riches and doesn't consider that poverty will come upon him. You know, a thought just came to me. I just, in my mind, just now made a cross-reference to something Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, that passage we were talking about last week. And when Jesus said, if your eye is evil, your whole body will be full of darkness. And that passage is right in the middle of other financial passages. So Jesus is talking about this principle of having an evil eye for riches. That's what he's talking about. And that's what we just read in Proverbs 28:22. Okay, now the lesson gives one more cause of debt. What do you suppose it is? Ignorance, greed. What could be the third cause?
Personal misfortune.
Yes, personal misfortune. Now, there's, I just found a text to plug in here, and the one I found says that God creates both the poor and the rich. Like, he's the maker of them both. I don't know if that's really a text you can apply to personal misfortune, but in the sense that God allows things sometimes to happen, I think it could apply. Things can happen. You can get into a car accident and not have the right insurance. And I know somebody that has happened to. And it can put you in a financial difficulty, right? So it's not because you purposely mishandled money, okay? And there are other things that can happen. You know, when I was in college, I had a tree fall on my pickup. I didn't have a big pickup. I had a little pickup, and a tree fell on the hood. Of all things to happen when you're in school and you need to stay focused on your studies and not worried about, you know, all your living situation and your finances. But that was kind of a personal misfortune I experienced. Anyway, so things happen, and you just have to deal with it and ask God for help and try to move on the best you can. But there was one other thing that the lesson missed, and it's all through Proverbs. And I'll give you, as to one of the causes of debt, I'll give you a clue. The ant. Does the ant teach us anything?
Story of working, work ethic.
Work ethic, hard work.
Also, it's an
Oh,
entendre.
Mike, where's the microphone? Oh, there you go. You
I
got
think
it.
it's a double entendre on not just worldly work, but the work that what God asks us to do is work to heavenly rewards, not just earthly rewards. So I think the simplicity of an ant brings out a lot, like a mustard seed, you know, smallest, but
Yeah, there are many object lessons.
right.
But the main thing, and I never thought about that, you know, the simplicity of their life as well. There's another object lesson there, but the main thing is they work hard. They're not lazy. And how many times, I mean, go to the Bible online, what is it, Bible Gateway, and type in lazy, and See how many times it comes up in the book of Proverbs, right? Or laziness, or slothfulness, or the sluggard, depending on the translation. Okay, so those are things that can contribute to debt. And now, there's something we can read here from 1 Timothy chapter 6. And this is probably one of the other concentrated scriptures dealing with money. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. By the way, what's the only thing you carry out of this world? Character. Exactly. Your character is the only thing you will take out of this world. Nothing else. So if that's true, if character is the only thing you can take out of this world, what should you be focused on in this life?
The refinement and development of character.
Exactly. The refinement and the development of your character, as Bill says. Okay. In having food and clothing, in this life, we need to be content with these. And, of course, I'm sure that implies shelter, some basic shelter. Everything that is dealing with your basic needs. And, by the way, we talked about the difference between a need and a want earlier on when we began this quarter. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For money is the root of all kinds of evil. Did I read that right?
Love of money.
Is this a text that is misquoted?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can go extremes. We don't want to do that. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness. There's the word greediness, greed, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So loving money leads to sorrow. As I was putting this lesson together, I was perusing some YouTube videos, and there was one about a billionaire's life, how miserable they are because they feel like they're surrounded by leeches all the time.
It's a good example of people that win those lottos. They win millions.
Yeah.
And they end up just saying, I wish I would have never won, or their life led into some kind of destructiveness, either lose their life or...
Yeah, basically they're fulfilling this.
And everybody else is
Timothy's
saying, how
words.
lucky you are, you won all that.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
the aftermath is...
Yeah, well, if I had won the lottery and all that money, millions, I would have spent it better. I would have,
Right.
managed it better than they did.
All of a sudden, I'm your hidden cousin.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm your hidden cousin.
I'm your cousin you never knew.
Yeah, human nature, isn't it interesting? Okay. Now let's look at a text on Monday's lesson, 1 John 2:15. Now, sometimes the lesson gives a text or for a day in their study. They'll give a text, but then I discovered that if you look at the context, there's a little bit more you can learn. So what I'm saying is they on Monday's lesson, they listed 1 John 2:15, but they didn't list verse 16. I think verse 16 is important to understand more what's going on. So in 1 John 2:15, it says, do not love the world or the things in the world. And of course that applies to money. But in verse 16, it tells us specifically the three categories that are in the world. And these are three categories of temptation. Okay? All that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Now, if you were to summarize each of these things into a word, you would have sensualism, materialism, and egotism. You see that? The lust of the flesh, sensualism, the lust of the eyes, materialism, and the pride of life, egotism. So the three isms. And the lust of the eyes, materialism, this would be the one dealing specifically with money, right? And so we can look at this word materialism. And my first question is, what causes a person to be materialistic? What makes you want to have more money?
I think a lot of this has to do with...
Stretch.
I think materialism also is centered around, not just yourself, but others and of outside influences. Like you see someone with something, you aspire to have
Okay.
it too. And, with our, our age, with the media, every day, I think every commercial, it's all materialism. Everywhere you look, that's all they show you.
Okay, you're you're headed right where I'm going. When
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, it's keeping up with the Joneses, right? But let me tell you, this Jones doesn't have a lot of stuff. So if you're going to keep up with me, it's probably not going to be that difficult. I should, comparatively speaking, though, I have actually quite a bit of stuff if you compare my life to, somebody else's in another country. But before we get to where you're going about, keeping up with the Joneses, one of the obvious reasons that people can become materialistic is just out of comfort and convenience, or even security. I mean, think of retirement. Why do people amass things for retirement? Because they want to feel secure, or they're thinking about their comforts in the future. And so that's one thing. But what this text brings out is something different. It's something more selfish. And this is it. I'll just pull it up here. So you touched on the egotism point when you're saying I need to keep up with the Joneses. This shows that the pride of life is something that actually fuels the lust of the eyes. Pride of life fuels materialism, and so does sensualism, by the way. Because think about it. There's so much I could say here about my life before I was married, because you always want to impress the opposite sex, right? And to do so, what do you have to present yourself as? Somebody who's, stable, kind of well off, good job, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how this plays into this, right? Okay, but it's a trap that's easy to fall into. And then, of course, we talked about the egotism thing, keeping up with the Joneses. In my family's life, my daughter, bless her heart, she has a cousin, as many of you know, Gabriella. And when one of them gets a new toy, guess what? The other one wants the same new toy, right? I mean, that's how it works. And I got to remind people, I say, hey, look, they're cousins, not sisters, okay? There's a little difference here. We don't have to have exactly the same everything. Okay, but anyway, keeping up with the Joneses or with the Mans, Okay, what do we have next? I'm going to skip this verse and...
Those two verses are almost like the polar opposite of Sermon on the Mount and Matthew. I think those two are like the opposite of what Christ said. Don't worry about what you're going to wear. Don't worry about materialistic
Yeah,
things.
exactly.
Don't, let God provide them.
So we have on Tuesday's lesson the memory text again. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. We've already pointed out that servant is a key word. And with that in mind, this is a very important day because it gives us some steps, some very practical steps to get out of debt. So first of all, there's a premise, and I just copied and pasted this stuff from the lesson so we can read it. The premise is a commitment to God to be faithful in returning his holy tithe to access his wisdom and blessing. He is eager to bless those who obey him, and you could add offerings to that as well. So, pay a faithful tithe. And the next thing, step 1, declare a moratorium on additional debt. So no more credit spending. If you don't borrow money, you can't get into debt. If you don't borrow any more money, you can't get into further debt. That's the whole thing. So the important thing is just stop.
So here's what the world has done. The world created this credit score system. And if you don't borrow, you don't have a credit score. And that means you're not worth anything to the world. So they basically make this credit score system that you're dependent on getting into debt so that you can pay off your debt so that your credit score can go up.
Yeah, it's
a very devastating system.
You can go one step further, and that is the United States is a corporate corporation, or say the world is a corporation, and when you are born, to them, to the system, you are a credit or a debt. You're this thing, maybe a materialistic thing. You are one or the other. So that's how that comes into play with your credit score, and you got to keep up, and it gets you into this twirling,
Yeah.
spiraling debt credit thing. You are one or the other.
Okay, now, I suppose we should bring up the question, is it a sin to have any debt? But let's go through this first, and then we'll get to that. So, just stop borrowing more money. That's the first step. The second step, make a covenant with God that from this point on, as He blesses, you will pay off your debts as quickly as possible. When God blesses you financially, use the money to reduce debt, not to purchase more things. Oh, I've got more money, now I can, buy what I wanted, even though I still have other debts to pay off. This step is probably the most crucial. When most folks receive unexpected money, they simply spend it. Don't. Instead, apply it to your debt reduction plan. Okay. Everything makes sense so far? Okay, now this last one is an interesting technique. Step 3 is the hands-on practical part. Make a list of all your debts from the largest to the smallest in descending order. So your largest debt will be on top, and they suggest it might be a mortgage, and on the bottom you'll have, credit cards or whatever. Begin by making it at least the minimum payment due on each of your debts on a monthly basis. Then double up or increase your payments in any way you can on the debt at the bottom of the list. You'll be happily surprised how quickly you can eliminate that smallest debt. Then use the money that you were paying on the bottom debt to add to the basic payment on the next debt. You see what they're doing as you work up the list. As you eliminate your smallest high-interest debts, you free up a surprising amount of money to place on the next higher debts. And by the way, I've heard people say or suggest that don't look at how much interest you're paying. Just list them from the greatest to the least, because when you this way, when you have like say you have a credit card with $2,000 on it in debt, okay, and that's your least debt. When you focus on your least one, it's going to also encourage you when you see debts getting paid off sooner, rather than, well, this one up here has higher interest. They said, don't worry about that. Tackle the smallest one first, and then let's say the payment on that was $50 a month or whatever you were paying. Then once that's paid off, take that $50 and add it to the minimum payment of the next one up. And this stuff gets compounded until you'd be surprised how quickly you can actually get out of debt that way. Okay, so now let's have a quick review of each of these things. So what's the premise? Before you even look at anything you have on a horizontal level, if you're thinking vertically, who comes first? God. So what was the premise?
Trust God.
Yeah, make sure you're paying your tithe, right? Okay, and step number 1?
Give a faithful tithe.
Well, that was the premise. I mean, that could be step number 1, I guess, and you could have 4 steps, but that was the premise. So step number 1 was stop. Just stop buying things with money you don't have. Just stop using credit. And then step number 2 was, if you receive extra money, what are you going to do with that money? Use it to keep up with the Joneses. No. Use it to pay off your debts, right? Don't buy things with it unless you absolutely need something, of course. And then step number 3 was is that what they call it, the snowball thing? Yeah, the whole snowball thing from the bottom up, paying off your debts. Okay, now, as we do this, there's a little promise we can claim in Hebrews 13:5. Keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I like the English Standard Version in this case. It's important to know that in all these transactions, God is with us, right? He's not going to forsake us. He's going to help us along the way, especially when we're paying our tithe. But also, He can make us content with what we have. And this,
When he mentions covetousness, that's like in a couple of the commandments, right? Thou shalt not covet.
yes,
So it's pretty consistent. Even with he doesn't say it in the commandments about money, right? Not exactly.
there's a
right?
lot.
Be coveting someone
But
else's
you
money
be
and their
right. So the covetousness is like a way of God saying, don't desire that because I'm what you should be desiring.
Now, the Ten Commandments actually say more about money than what you read on the surface.
Yeah.
In fact, we read that text in 1 John 2:15 that brings out those three areas, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Do you realize that in the 10th commandment, when it says, you shall not covet, those three areas are covered? Okay, think about this. Sensualism, lust of the flesh. You should not covet your neighbor's wife. Okay? And then there's materialism, where it says, nor his cattle, nor anything that's, none of his possessions, right? But it also mentions his manservant or his maidservant. Now, when you have servants, that's a position. You're in a position of authority, right? Pride of life. Yeah, you see? So it's all there in the 10th commandment. Very interesting. Okay. What do we have next? Okay, now this is interesting. Surety, which we've talked a little bit about already. I told you it was going to come up again. And GRQ, what's that? I had to use some shorthand here. Get rich quick schemes. Now let me explain something to you. I fell for a couple get rich quick schemes when I was younger and when I was in college. And looking back, you just think how silly I was. But I've noticed, looking at things on the internet, over the years, the verbiage changes. And people who are trying to sell things or scam people, they have to change the verbiage because eventually the public will catch on. And let me explain what I mean. The idea of a get-rich-quick scheme, it used to be popular, but today it's approached with a lot more caution. People have caught on. So what has happened, the verbiage has now later changed. I noticed it was changing from get-rich-quick schemes to extra income opportunities. So the verbiage changed, okay? Extra income opportunities. So you can see that sounds a little more safe, doesn't it? A little safer, maybe not as risky. I mean,
It's the same thing, though.
yeah.
What they're doing nowadays is Forex. They make videos where someone trades on Forex and they make a lot of money within like 2 weeks. Like, oh, I made more than I make in my job in 2 weeks from Forex. And unfortunately, the truth behind Forex is those videos are made by scammers. And when you get into it, they just work to steal your money.
Now, I'm not exactly familiar with Forex.
It's foreign exchange.
Oh, okay.
You're trading on currency.
Okay, got it. Any other comments? Okay.
In the 90s, it was pyramid scams. Like
Oh,
pyramid
yeah.
schemes.
Yeah.
If you're at
That-
the top of the pyramid, you
Okay.
carry all the.
Yeah, I tried a couple of those too. Remember Melaleuca? Was that back in the 90s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think all that was caffeine, right? The product was caffeine.
It's a tea tree oil, and it has some good properties, and the products are really good. But if you think you're going to get rich on it, I observed people who actually did make it work, but
They were at the top of the pyramid.
no. What happened was it consumed their life. I mean, they ate, drank, and slept Melaleuca. It was everything to them. They even went so far, and they were Adventists, they even went so far to say that Melaleuca had the health message. And so if you really want to make one of these things work, you got to just put everything, your salvation almost into it, which the Bible kind of discourages that approach, right? To making money? Yeah. Anyway, let's read this statement here. Surety usually occurs, now we're talking about Or I jumped right to get-rich-quick schemes. Well, we understand how surety works. We already talked about that, right? Because you're basically, the loan officer will tell the unqualified person that if he or she will get a friend with good credit to co-sign with him or her, then the bank will grant the loan and hold the co-signer responsible in the event of a default. But here's the interesting thing. Studies show that 75% of those who co-signed end up making the payments. So this is just a way to make those who are not financially responsible to continue to be not financially responsible. That's all this is.
That's the way of stupidity.
And it's the way of stupidity for those who are willing to put themselves, co-signing someone who wants to buy a engagement ring, but he doesn't have the money for it. Okay, interesting stuff. All right, this was the stuff for the get-rich-quick schemes. So there's a website. It's really good. I didn't have time to look at it, but there's a website, government website, usa.gov, Common Scams and Frauds. And you can go there, and there's a whole list of them, and you can study all of them. It's good to get educated. But one of the main principles to guard yourself is this, and I took this right out of the lesson, but it's common sense. You've heard it before. When it sounds too good to be true, it surely is. I like the word surely. They didn't use the word probably, because that's kind of what we use sometimes to fool ourselves. Well, yeah, it probably might be too good to be true. No, they say if it sounds too good to be true, it surely, that means certainly is. Okay? There was one scam I got to share with you that I avoided because recently, when I got let go from the penitentiary, I had to downsize a little bit, and we had 2 vehicles, so I decided to sell my car. We didn't need 2 cars if. But anyway, so I put it on Craigslist. Now watch out when you get on Craigslist. So I got an email from somebody who is willing to pay more than the cost I was asking. He would send me a check, and after it was deposited, he would have some guy come and pick up the car. And so I thought, I emailed him back. I said, wait a minute, you're telling me you're willing to give me more money than I'm asking and purchase this car sight unseen, that's the term, sight unseen, without even looking at it? And I was a bit confused, and we were going back and forth, and I said, give me your phone number. So I called him up, and as soon as I heard his voice, you could tell, there's something shady going on, right? So, and he explained to me, yeah, all you got to do is, as soon as you get the check, you'll see the funds deposited in your account. All I need is your he didn't ask, they're not asking for your bank account information. All he needed was the address, my name and address to send. He had my name already. All he needed is the address to send the check to. That's it. Once I deposit the check, then somebody comes, picks up the car. That's it. So I said, well, let me get back to you on this. That's always a good policy, right? Well, I did a little Googling. You can get on the internet and you can Google anything, and sure enough, I came up with this scam, and what they do is these checks are fake. They will appear in your checking account, but it will take 2 weeks or so for your bank to actually discover that they're fraudulent. But by the time that has happened, a guy has already come and picked up your car. He's gone, and so now you're left with the bill. Yeah, and no car.
The other one they offer you Bitcoin, and then the same thing, they offer you more than what the value, and then so you send it or they pick it up and take it. Well, what they do on the Bitcoin, I think, is you can say, hey, this is not what this guy told me it was. I want my money back. And so they take what you thought you sold to them, and they take their money, their Bitcoin, out of your accounts or whatever. That's another big scam.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff out there. The way I solved this situation, I went right back. Well, after I did my research, I emailed the guy back. I told him, I said, this is what you're doing, so have a nice day. and then I changed I added to my car sale on Craigslist, I said, no sight unseen sales. That's what you have to do, and then these people will not contact you, they'll leave you alone. So, yeah, you got to watch yourself today, everything you do, whether you're selling something or buying something, either way. I mean, imagine that. I'm the one selling something, and I could be scammed. I mean, anyway. Now, here's something else that's interesting, and that is in Thursday's lesson, term limits and borrowing points. In Deuteronomy 15, chapter 15, verse 1, at the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release of debt. So it appears that although there was some allowance for debt in this system among the Israelites, it only lasted 7 years for a person, at the most. So, back to the question, is it a sin to be in debt? I think the answer to that is, what do you think? No. Okay. But it is a sin to spend money in a selfish way, which could lead to debt. Does that distinction, is that distinction clear?
The intent of how
Yeah,
you
the
use
intent.
the intent of how you
Obviously, there are some cases where you really do need to borrow money, but it should be a last resort, right? But anyway, in this case, you have only 7 years, and this is the form of the release. Every creditor who has lent anything to his neighbor shall release it. He shall not require it of his neighbor or his brother, because it is called the Lord's release. And I think this was a good policy. Now, I want us to contrast what I have highlighted, 7 years with what happens with people today in these two areas. Now, I know this is a bit controversial because everybody thinks they need a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a PhD, and everybody thinks they need to own their own home. And let me just add that owning your own home will happen in reality at the end of the 30-year mortgage, not at the beginning or any time along the way, okay? The bank, and here's how, they fool you with language again. Oh, you own your home, no, you don't. The bank owns it. You don't own it until it's paid off, okay? But I'm not saying, we shouldn't get a home loan. That's not what I'm saying, of course. But I'm talking about the principle of how debt works and how society and how these institutions have framed language in such a way as to fool you that you're not really in debt when you really are. Also, with these student loans, not everybody needs a college degree to get a job. But I think sometimes we overstress this point. And by the way, both of these, whether you want to agree with me or not, both of these areas have become rackets, money-making rackets. Just look at the housing market here. Now, what would cost you, before, I don't know. I don't need to bring up examples. You guys see it yourself. You live here, right?
Prices have doubled since 2016.
Yeah. And the unfair thing about that is the fact that people's wages don't double at the same time. Your wages don't increase the same to the same degree that the housing market does. And so how is that really fair? You see what I'm saying? And now people in a situation where, younger people, and they're starting their life, they want to buy a home, but they can't afford. How can you afford $500,000 on a place when you just have when you're working, well, I don't know. Maybe you just got out of college and you got your first job and you're just, a mediocre income. You can't afford a $500,000 house. And that'll get you just your regular 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single level. Anyway, it's crazy. Or maybe 400,000, right? That's a little better. Okay, I won't talk about that anymore. But the student loan thing, I talked to somebody, a coworker, a couple years ago, and this was when, I got to be careful what I say. I know about COVID and everything and vaccines, but when I decided It was my personal conviction that I should make my own health care choices, and I left the penitentiary. I was talking to a coworker, and this coworker said, you know, I really kind of agree with you. However, I have these student loans that if I stay here for another year and a half, the government will pay off, because if you get a government job, you know, if you work so many years, they promise to pay off those loans. Well, I said, well, how much do you have? It was over $50,000. So the point is, you can make yourself a slave to the state, and that can influence how difficult your decisions will be if you want to get out of a situation. In that person's case, they felt like they were stuck. Okay, so just saying, you know, that phrase, just saying. Anyway, what else do we have? Well, we have a few further thoughts on Friday's lesson, and these are from Counsels on Stewardship, page 257. Be determined never to incur another debt. Now, I believe this is Ellen White counseling one of her sons. And she says, be determined never to incur another debt. Deny yourself 1,000 things rather than run in debt. This has been the curse of your life, getting into debt. Avoid it as you would the smallpox. Smallpox you would avoid more than COVID probably, right? Make a solemn commitment with God that by his blessing you will pay your debts and then owe no man anything. She's quoting Romans there, that text we read. Owe no man anything if you live on porridge and bread. Basic needs, right? And then she says, deny your taste, deny the indulgence of appetite. So yes, it will require some self-denial. That's how it works. And then work them off as fast as possible. So basically the lesson is kind of arranging her comments into those steps we talked about on how to get out of debt. Work them off as fast as possible. When you can stand forth as a free man again, owing no man anything, you will have achieved a great victory. So the question is, do you want to achieve a great victory? Okay. With that said, it looks like it's time to close, so let's have a prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the principles in the Bible about money, and give us the strength to deny ourselves so that we can manage money to your glory, so